Okay. One question that was messaged was how we can begin to get our heads around understanding a child and whether behaviour might be an additional need that's presenting or a behaviour that's responding to something else. The child, so when we see them on a Sunday, we see a little bit of them. How can we begin to work out what's going on when we're not professionals? This particular child, my understanding is correct, was there was something going on in their family circumstance that was a big thing anyway, and it was trying to work out how do we make sense of this behaviour.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for a lot of these things, we've got to recognize that, especially when it comes to behavior, I tend to, when it comes to behavior, I tend to want to chat to the parents and I want to come alongside them in a helpful way. I'm not accusing them of having a brat for a child. I'm not wanting them to become defensive. I'm really just saying, we've struggled this morning. Is there anything I should know about, or how can we help in any way? I often say to parents, when I'm asking them how you might more helpfully partner us as a children's ministry, I'm asking them, could you inform us if there's a domestic issue or something traumatic that's happened this week, so we can at least understand why the child's behaving in a particular way? And so I think if you're coming alongside parents with that kind of attitude, it's helpful. Also, you're only seeing a child, if you're, once again, if you're on the rota, then you're only seeing the child occasionally. It's quite hard for you to understand what's normal for that child. So, if children are being uncharacteristically badly behaved or whatever, then there may be a reason for that. Maybe they've been bullied at school. Maybe there's been some grief or trauma at home. Maybe mum and dad have even just had a fight in the car on the way to church. That could cause an issue. So you're trying to get to the bottom of that. Of course, there's a flip side to all of this, that when a child gets diagnosed, as they call it, the problem is that sometimes a lot of stuff that's got nothing to do with their diagnosis or their difficulty actually gets excused under the banner of the difficulty. So that is one of the things. I had that with one of the Aspie kids in our class who was refusing to do certain things, and his excuse was always, I'm Asperger's. Now, his Aspie had nothing to do with him not being able to just sit down and do what he was told at that particular point in the lesson. Absolutely nothing to do with that whatsoever. So, I think having a close relationship with the parents, I mean, his mother in particular has been incredibly helpful in feeding us information and helping us to think through how we might best help him. There's been books for us to read and all that kind of stuff, which has just been really helpful. So I think having that kind of close relationship with the parents it helps you to understand where the actual issue is. Very, very important. But as I say, the general feeling must be that you are coming alongside them to be a support to them. You're not coming in an accusatory way. You're just trying to say, look, the way that our system is set up, and that's part of the problem here. Part of the problem here is that the way that the education system has generally been set up for 80% of the people who function in this particular way. And yet I would argue that the education system has not actually been set up to help boys either. And so what it immediately has become is it becomes an us versus them. So, 80% of the population don't have this particular learning issues. We set up education. It works in this particular way. Then we're trying to accommodate them, the 20%. Now, that's part of the problem. I think part of the problem is trying to understand that actually we all function differently. There's never going to be a catch-all in terms of education. It's never going to be like that. There's a general rule that works for most people, but actually it doesn't work for everybody. And that's why it's so important that we're getting to know our children, we're getting to know their domestic situation, we're getting to know how they function, that we can tailor our lessons for them. I mean, that's what you naturally do in any lesson, isn't it? You're teaching 3-year-olds, you're adapting a lesson for 3-year-olds. You're adapting a lesson for a rural context or for an urban context. That's what preachers are doing. They're adapting the text that they're teaching it in a particular way depending on the context where they're in. And it's exactly the same. So if we look at the makeup of our class in terms of the children's abilities, we are thinking consciously as we prepare our lessons for each of those children in our class, and how can we connect with them in the best way. I think that's what we're trying to do. Does that help? Is that answering the question? Sarah, are you there?
Yeah.
Or would the person who asked the question like to come back at me on that?
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, I think that answers it well, Rory. Thanks.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah.
There is another question come in, and I'll ask you, Rory, and then you can decide whether you do with it. I'll answer now or later.
Sure.
How do we navigate relationships with parents who are part of our church family, and actually who we may be friends with, but we're Sunday school leader as well, because it's a slightly different thing, isn't it? If you're a teacher, you've got a slightly professional relationship, but we're the body of Christ. We're their Sunday school teacher. How do we go about that? I think the person who asks this question is actually a teacher, if I've remembered correctly. So there may be a, yeah.
I'm not entirely sure if I understand it. Are we struggling?
Does the person want to actually add anything more?
Yeah, can I just try and clarify how I'm understanding it, then you can tell me if I'm right.
If you want to add some more, yeah, go Zoe.
Hello, I'm Zoe.
Hey, Zoe.
So just obviously the relationships with church family is much more of a friendly relationship, but if we're kind of discussing with a parent about a behavioural issue or an additional need, how do we navigate that in a church family way rather than I'm your Sunday school leader, if that makes sense?
Well, I would have thought it should be easier. I suppose it depends on the kind of ethos that you have between what is called Sunday school teachers and parents in the church as a whole. What sort of ethos you have as far as that's concerned. I mean, I'm trying to say that parents, we are here to help you in any way that you can to bring your children up in the fear and the knowledge of the Lord. That is our job. Our job is not to do that. It's your job, which is why during lockdown they've all just received lesson links from me, and I've told them to get on with it and to contact me on our closed Facebook group if they need any help explaining something, because that's what I'm going to help them to do, but I'm not going to do the job for them. So I think we've got quite a strong ethos in our church of that. And so if I were to come alongside a person, and I'm also trying to regularly engage in conversation about their children, just generally in terms of their spirituality. So for instance, if Naomi prays a prayer that shows a particular understanding of a text, then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Dave after the service and say, hey, it was so great. You should have heard what Naomi prayed today. And then I'll tell him what she prayed. So I think if we get into the habit of those kinds of conversations that are overwhelmingly positive, where you're saying, hey, or a child says something, I say, yeah, look, I didn't have much time to answer in the class. He's obviously interested in this. It really would be worth you following it up afterwards. So if you've got that kind of relationship going, then when it comes to an issue, well, it's just part of the regular thing that you're doing. It's not, you don't only come to the parents when there's a problem with their child. You're coming to them with the positive stuff as well. So that when you come with the negative stuff, it's just a natural extension of that. You're saying we're trying to deal with the child holistically. So I think that's the kind of thing you need to be trying to, if it's not already part of your culture in the church, to make that a part of the culture in your church by modeling it. So I listen. That's why I'm so keen on prayer time for children. And I'm so keen that the prayer time relates to the lesson that we've just taught. And then what that does is it provides a sort of window into their soul for me and shows me how they've connected in their hearts with the truth that's being taught. And so I will listen to those sorts of things. Or if a child says something quite profound, or there's a deep insight into the text or something like that, I gap it to the parents straight afterwards. So it must be a natural thing that every time something, perhaps of significance happens, or they're coming to me and they're feeding back. So they're constantly part of that process. Then I think when you start coming with anything that's negative, it's just much easier because it's just part of what we're doing to try and help these children. Does that help? And I do hope there is a massive distinction between regular day schooling and what we call Sunday school, which is such a horrible term, really. I don't want to call it Sunday school. I also don't want to call it children's church, because it's not church. Okay, it's just a small fragment of our church community. So we're Cornerstone Church, and we call it Cornerstone Kids because they're still part of the whole. There's a slight theological thing going on there for me. But then, as I say, I don't want it to be school. It must not feel like day school. It's different.
Yeah, thank you. That's partly why I asked the question, because I don't think it should be like school.
No.
Thank you.
Let's abandon the word Sunday school, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anybody else? When we spoke in your groups, can anyone just share from their groups what are the kinds of issues we're seeing? I mean, if the stats are correct, that 20% of kids are struggling in some way, shape, or form to a greater or lesser extent, then the reality is that you should have some of these kids, some of these kids in your Sunday school. So what are the kinds of things that we are seeing? Were you able to identify anything from what we've looked at this morning? Just anybody.
We have 3 out of 15 who are diagnosed autistic.
Okay, and in terms, I mean, these are such horrible terms, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's diagnose and, you know, how severe and all that kind of stuff. And you'll have to forgive us for the language, but it's just, how else do you navigate this? You know, so to what extent are they autistic? Are they high functioning, low functioning? Are they all different?
Oh, I mean, all completely different. I mean, fortunately to our church family, and so we have lots of information from the parents, and
Good.
One is not church family, and he has told us of his diagnosis, but we had grave suspicions before that he had additional needs. So
Yeah.
we are going with the fact he's probably correct.
And sometimes it's quite easy for us to identify. I mean, one of the hardest things for us was we had a family friend actually, and my wife and I both looked at this kid at about the age of 3. We thought to ourselves, something not quite right here. But you know, it's quite a difficult thing for you to approach a parent and say, I think you need to get your child assessed. I think there's an issue here, especially when it's their first child. And that's often the case, isn't it? It's the first child, you don't know what to expect as a parent because they're not born with a manual. So even in terms of milestones, you'll even see with the Carly Fleischman story that it took a while before people start seeing, actually, she's not meeting milestones. The only reason her parents picked it up was she's got a twin sister who doesn't have any of her conditions. So her sister started racing away from her in terms of her development. And that's the only reason why they picked it up. Otherwise, they would have picked it up even later. And of course, the later you pick these things up, the less opportunity you have to adapt and to change and to accommodate as best possible. As I said, you know, there was I think it was maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago, there was a lead article in a newspaper here in the UK suggesting that a lot of what we're talking about today and a lot of what I'm going to talk about now really is just good teaching practice. Whether your child is diagnosed or not, it's just good teaching practice. And there's no reason why we shouldn't do it. You'll just be better teachers at the end of the day if you try to implement some of the stuff. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments? So we spoke about autism. 3 out of 15 is quite high, although in terms of averages, it's fine. Anybody else got anything else that they've been dealing with in their classes?
We have a boy who's got PDA, so we would see kind of some behavioural challenges and difficulties with the kind of whatever your constraints are to your routine, you know, just joining with that.
And how does that impact the rest of the class? And sorry, what age is this? What age range are we talking about?
8 or 9.
Okay. And how does that impact the rest of the class? Because the rest of the class, of course, is now aware that there's a difference.
Yeah, so it could be wanting to leave the room for him. And I think the others would know that he would struggle with dealing with the kind of routine of what that Sunday kind of looks like.
Yeah.
Struggling to listen within. So I think there's a distraction for the others who are there, but I don't think a fear, although I think sometimes that can be the case, can't it? When they're watching somebody who is struggling, the other children can feel quite fearful about what's going to happen next because it's unpredictable for them watching.
Yeah.
So that, but you know, very on board parents, very helpful, but just kind of getting in and understanding how to help him feel secure with that is a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, and the crowd watching on can respond in one of 2 ways, really. You've suggested the idea of fear, of not knowing what's going to happen, but there is also this idea of there's a sense of this is unfair. So he gets to run around and decide when he wants to leave. I get told off if I do that. there's you start creating that sort of thing, and that becomes quite tricky to deal with. I had one boy in a sort of smaller scale who actually did need something to fiddle with while he was part of his lesson. And then everybody wants a fidget spinner. So, I had to try and navigate the whole thing by saying, look, he needs this. You don't actually need this. How I eventually resolved it was to basically give him a piece of paper and say, I want you to try and cartoon or draw, because he enjoys doing that. Try and draw what I'm talking about. Okay, so that was for him, that was keeping him occupied. He was doing something. And then all the other kids say, yeah, I'd like to do that too. I said, okay, as long as you're drawing what I'm talking about, then that's fine. You can do it. And I found that's been quite helpful. So it's helpful for the other children as well. But yeah, you need to navigate that. And then you say that the children, I don't think the way to go about it is to try and ignore the problem, because all the children can see that there's an issue, whatever that may be. This child's not engaging with our current format. I mean, it's worth even looking at your format and saying, is the format helpful for anyone? It could. I mean, when a parent comes to me and says, my child hates coming to Sunday school, the first thing I think is, well, are we doing a shocking job? So I want to take it personally and say, hang on a second, could we be doing this better? I mean, the child could have a point. You could have an awful Sunday school lesson, and fair play. So, if you think about how to try and accommodate that particular child, are there accommodations that you could make that would just be generally helpful for all the children? So we don't get set in our ways and saying, this is how we do it and you have to conform, because that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that in every area of their life, they're being forced to conform for no good reason, for no theological reason. It's just, this is how we do it. This is how we're comfortable doing it. Whereas I think if we can think a little bit broader and say, if I can accommodate that child in some way by doing this, do you think that would be helpful for all the children? Yeah, it might be. In which case, why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you do it? In that sense, I suppose it's a little bit like thinking like the weaker, stronger brother issue. I mean, I know it's in one sense totally unrelated. I'm speaking off the cuff here. But where Paul says he will give up his right to partake of alcohol for the sake of the weaker brother. Is that kind of thing where you say, what, I'll forego this part of my lesson or forego this structure of my lesson for the sake of this one who doesn't engage well with it. And I'd rather do something else that helps them to engage. And actually, everybody lands up enjoying it. It's like handing out a piece of paper and say, draw on this. A few of the other children also said, yes, we would also like to doodle and draw while you do your lesson. So that's fine. So seeing that as an opportunity rather than a challenge, I think is what we're trying to say.
I think we've got a good opportunity now as well, haven't we, with a lot of our Sunday groups having not met because of COVID, that as we think about how we meet, we can do it differently, potentially, because they've all not been in it for a year.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm really hoping that we're going to develop some sort of hybrid model. There will be children who legitimately can't be there for whatever reason, and they're able to tune in. We just land up streaming our stuff on Zoom anyway. We've already got all the technology. We now know how to unmute ourselves before we start speaking for the most part. So, let's take advantage of that. Now, whether you're going to stream that to the world on YouTube or whether you're just going to do it privately through a Zoom thing, which is what we are currently doing. All our toddlers meet every single Sunday, and we have been doing for the last 4 weeks. So we provide them with what we call an act of worship led from the front, and they are arranged socially distanced with their parents on 4 of those sponge puzzle pieces, which form a 1 meter square, with a chair for the parents, and the toddlers are coming in for a live broadcast, or for a live Bible tot session, and that same session is being zoomed to children who can't be there because we don't have enough space in our building for everybody. So we book it until it's full and COVID secure, and then it gets zoomed to the other homes. And we make a really big effort of trying to engage the children who are on the screen. Now, people have got used to that. So we've got used to seeing some members of Parliament in Parliament and seeing someone from Scotland being zoomed in on a screen. We're used to that. The world is used to that now. So why wouldn't we do that? No, I don't want people to become lazy now and not come to church, because I think theologically we should be meeting together physically. But there may well be children, I don't know, maybe a child goes to mum every second week and she's not a church goer, and he's with dad every other weekend. Why wouldn't we provide a Zoom link for that child to join our class? Why wouldn't we do that? If he's prepared to take his iPad and engage, why wouldn't we do that? I certainly see that as a fantastic opportunity. That means you get him every week instead of every second week. Why wouldn't you do that? Okay, any other comments? Yeah, Anne.
Unmute me. In our church, the problem that we've had is there is quite a few autistic on the range, and they can't do Zoom. That's an issue and the barrier that they have.
Yep.
And then you've got the other one who can't. We can meet out for a walk, but the other one can't do a walk.
Yeah.
So it's been incredibly difficult to do. You know, we've had Zoom sessions, but not every. It's just been quite difficult to work out each individual needs.
Yeah.
And putting something on for everything, because it's just been, it's been impossible really. But it's just trying to engage everyone in some way.
Yeah, so I think the conclusion that we're going to end up coming to, which is what I really said at the beginning, it's impossible, I think, to skill every single one of your people up. I mean, on my team of 25, I need to put 25 people all through specialized SEN training. Or do I just spend time highlighting some of the issues that they might want to be looking out for, so they don't just think that the child's being a brat? You know, these are some of the things you might want to be looking out for, and I'll show you in a minute how we might do that. And then actually maybe have someone in your church. There's got to be, statistically, there's got to be someone in your church that really has a heart for this. So we've got a woman who actually works at the school where we used to meet as a church. She's special educational teacher, and she's fantastic. So I don't put her on the regular rota. And what we do with her is when we have children with profound special needs, like the girl who was joining us who was non-verbal and wheelchair bound, then Amy would be with that girl in the lesson, in a one-to-one, in a supportive role. So the girl was joining in the right age group, even though she was non-verbal and not able to move. All she had was eye glancing. She would glance with her eyes. Is it yes or no? That's how severe it was. And yet it's possible for Amy to listen to me teaching a lesson and to translate that into getting her to engage yes or no, blue or black, whatever the color is, in order to check that she's engaging. And she was engaging fine with the resources. You know, she was hearing me. It's another Carly Fleischman. You know, nothing actually wrong with her brain in that sense. She's perfectly lucid. She's capable of learning and learning a great deal, but just because she can't verbalize it, we've got to give her a voice in some way. And for us, that was using a whiteboard and answering questions and getting her to answer basically yes or no. And she's using her eyes to do that. It's remarkable. But I'll talk more about how we adapted things for that particular child. So yeah, I think trying to find someone who's a champion, who can not necessarily be on the rota, but who can move from class to class and just help in some way is quite helpful. So you almost have like an SEN team going. You could have more than one person. And sometimes with these kids, they're quite erratic in their attendance because home life is very, very disruptive. So they won't necessarily be with you every single week. They may do, but they may not do. And the other thing that you've got to recognize is if you as a church get known as someone, as a church that actually provides and looks after kids that have, you know, profound learning difficulties, guess what? People are going to come to you. So if you start doing that, you'll get more and more people. That's just how it is. So it's worth trying to think through how you might do a team. That's what we started doing at Word Alive as well. You sort of got 6 people on team. They're all SEN, and they just basically swoop in and help wherever help is needed for the particular program. Okay, any other comments before we get to more practical? Yeah, Kat.
I was just going to say, even just incorporating things like Makaton signs into your worship, your stories, your activities, so everyone's getting involved. It's not necessarily for a specific person, but then if you have a person that needs it, uses it, then you've just equipped the children, the team, everyone to have kind of a little bit of communication.
Yeah, and that's very good. So for instance, I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, you know, if you can substitute Makaton signing for some of the silly signs that we actually do, children's actions that we do, that's a better thing to do, isn't it? Rather use a Makaton sign for Jesus than, I don't know how you would normally do it, you know, point up or something like that. I mean, I think it's this.
So this is the BSL and Makaton.
Yes, yes. So we
Jesus.
even with our Bible tots, when we talked about Jesus being crucified, we do this. You see, so it's worth doing that. I mean, it may be that someone needs to come in and help you over sort of revamp some of your actions that you do with your children's songs. But there's no reason why you couldn't get the whole church doing that. And we have a children's song every single week in our church. So there's no reason why you wouldn't either BSL or Makaton. You're obviously not going to sign the entire song necessarily for children's ones. It's normally the key words that we are doing, you know, crown or whatever it is. There's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't want to do that. Yeah, good one. Yeah, and that's a very simple thing, isn't it? That's not hard. Okay, anything else? Otherwise, I'll forge ahead. Is the garden calling? Anybody gardening today? Yes? I'm busy building a greenhouse. Yeah, very exciting. Hydroponics, that's where I'm going. That's my lockdown project, hydroponics. I'll let you know next year if it was a successful year or not, or if it was just a waste of money.
We'll expect you to bring crops to share next year when you come
Well,
forward.
yes.
Yeah, we'll be looking
Right.
forward to it.
Let's see if we don't have COVID-20. All right, let's have a look through how we might be helpful. Let me quickly share again my screen. One thing I've had to try and teach my own children really is that we've got to understand the contribution that people who are, I think the term at the moment is called neurotypical, who aren't sort of typical of how we do things. You know, like my son's brain is like a Macintosh, while the rest of us are all struggling along with Microsoft. That's just how it is. I mean, you know, his ability in terms of his art and his storytelling ability, it all stems from his dyslexia. He used to have vivid nightmares when he was a child. It all comes back to his dyslexia. His ability at a very young age to be able to tell a story and to be able to bring all the threads together at the end was remarkable. His vocabulary, I mean, he couldn't spell most of it, but as long as you're providing support, you could get the most fantastic stories out of him. You know, my wife would type it up and he would just tell the story. You know, getting someone who's an architect to be a dyslexic architect, fantastic. You're never going to have a staircase in the wrong place. Spatially, it's going to be brilliant. I'm convinced that my father and my brother are both dyslexic. Both really underperformed at school. Both absolutely hated reading. If there was a novel to read for school, they'd wait till the video came out, that sort of thing, or the film. Really struggled with spelling. When we went through this whole process with Aidan, read a book called The Gift of Dyslexia, and you realize it really is actually a gift. You say to yourself, you know, I said to them, I think you're both dyslexic. They took offense. They took offense because it's been so heavily stigmatized, and it's so us versus them sort of thing. Don't realize that both of them have a phenomenal ability to see a product in 3 dimensions. You know, my father's helped many people with their building plans for their homes to make changes because spatially he can understand that sort of stuff. So I think what we're trying to do with all of this is saying, yes, we understand the language that's being used, that they are, you know, special educational needs or disabilities or other abilities. But actually what we're just trying to say is that they don't conform to the norm. There's lots of people that don't conform to the norm. And we've got to ask ourselves the question, is the norm actually correct? And how can we accommodate them? So let's have a look at how we might do that in the local church. First thing again, which I'm glad to hear some of you have already spoken about in your groups, ask the parents. They are your absolute best source of knowledge with regards to these children. They deal with them on a day-to-day basis. Ask them. And yet, sadly, there's often a stigma attached to these sorts of things. So sometimes parents will be reluctant to put it forward. We certainly found that with some of the conferences that we've run, where parents won't actually say what the additional needs might be, even if it's on the form. They won't volunteer it. They feel that they're being a burden. So if we can just have more open conversations about that as a church, and say, listen, we are here to help your child maximize their experience and their understanding of who Jesus is. And we will do anything that will help your child, anything. If we need to adapt the program, if we need to bring in extra resources in terms of people, if we need to change the structure of what we're doing or how we're doing it, we're more than happy to do that in order to try and help this child learn in the best possible way. Some parents might be in denial. Some parents might not have their children assessed. Not all schools are very good about getting children assessed early because it requires extra resources, it requires extra funding, it requires extra paperwork. And so you may find a child who has not yet been assessed. You may find parents who are in denial. As I said, if it's a first child, then parents may not understand where the differences are until much later. So, but if you can ask the parents and engage in a conversation with them, that is first prize. Second thing you can do is you can produce what is called a sort of profile page, a one-page profile. I like to call it the cheat sheet. And a cheat sheet looks something like this. And a cheat sheet is about the child. So all about me, the name of the child, and includes a whole lot of different things, which will just give you a heads up on how to deal with the child. So things that I enjoy. So what are the things that the child enjoys? You know, that's often if they're having a particular episode or a meltdown or a breakdown, you want to know how to engage them with what they enjoy. Medical info, including allergies, very important, and what to do about those allergies. Does the child carry an EpiPen? Is the child subject to seizures? What do you need to do in the case if a child does have a seizure? What are you supposed to do? Very important to get that information right down. In an emergency, let's say that it's gone really wrong and you don't know how to deal with it. How do you actually contact the person? How do you contain the child in the safest possible way? Those sorts of things. What can make me upset? Helpful to know what those sorts of triggers might be, so you can do it as part of your planning. Things I can do myself. Okay, so you know the part of the problem with this whole thing is it's always about disabilities and what they can't do. So we need to try and work out, well, what can they do? So you focus on that. So what can they do? I mean, it can be something as simple as I can go to the toilet on my own. I've been toilet trained. Or I can actually handle a pair of scissors. So we're not constantly doing stuff for people that they don't need you to do for them. Okay. So what can I do for myself? Things I need help with. So, you know, I can actually go to the toilet on my own. All I need is someone to hold the door open for me. Or all I need is someone to unbutton, or whatever the case may be. Okay, obviously child safeguarding and all that sort of stuff, you know, don't take it for granted, but within that realm, what can I do and what do I just need help with? It might be fine motor skills, it might be gross motor skills. How do you help them? How to help me when I'm upset. Now that's going to relate to the things that I enjoy, probably on the left. How to help me when I'm upset. How do you calm this child down? Now, I've discovered with one child in our church, which I'm convinced he's got oppositional defiant disorder. If he's not complying or he's having a bad day, then everybody has to have a bad day. No one is allowed to have fun. And if he's challenged in any way, he digs his heels in, and there's absolutely, you will never win. It's impossible for you to win when he has a meltdown episode. And so to help him when we get upset, the easiest thing to do is to take him one side and to talk through the issue in a very supportive, loving, kind way, to talk through the issue. If you have a standoff with him, you'll never ever win. And so I need to win him over. And that's what I've got to do, which is not the first port of call for everybody. So I've had to learn to do that in dealing with him for the last 8 years. So how to help him when he's upset. Now, these are all questions that the parents will know answers to. So if you can just say to them, can you help us with this? That'll be good. How do I communicate? Are they verbal or non-verbal? Do they use sign language? Is there a particular sign that the child uses for toilet? Do you know what that is if they need to go? There'll be some basic things that we need to do in terms of our understanding. so that we can communicate with them and they can communicate with us. So pictures or symbols are helpful. As I mentioned earlier, the girl in our church who was non-verbal used to use her eyes. So it's just a simple thing of providing a small whiteboard, and all that Amy would do was write yes or no if I was asking a yes or no question. Or she would quickly write out just a summary of the two options, and she would just glance to the left or glance to the right with a big smile on her face normally, you see, because she knew the answers. And she was able to participate. And then Amy would become her voice, you know. She would say, you know, Sarah says it's this. So she's also participating. She's hearing that her opinion is being voiced in the group, and she's part of it. Next thing you want to do is you want to adapt the lesson accordingly. So once you've got that cheat sheet and you understand the child's profile and how you might help them, then you can adapt the lesson. And there's different ways that you can adapt the lesson. The more senses that a lesson engages, the higher the probability that the information is going to be transferred in some way, shape, or form, or successfully absorbed by the child. Okay, and children process information in different ways. So there'll obviously be visual. So seeing pictures, having visual aids is very helpful. Sometimes it's not just a picture of the story. Sometimes it's a symbol that represents the concept. So if God is depicted as a crown, then we want to be consistent in our depiction of God as a crown. If you have symbols for different things, so maybe the Holy Spirit symbol is a flame, you would consistently use that symbol throughout your teaching. And so you're trying to make things visual. Children learn in terms of auditory, so they're hearing the story. You could use music as well. Music is a very, very powerful medium to teach. You know, songs that retell the story in a fun way could be helpful. And of course, kinesthetic or tactile learning as well sort of is related to this. So it's touch and feel and movement. Okay, so we normally have a sensory bag, especially for younger children, but there's no reason why you couldn't have for older children as well. A sensory bag where you'll pull stuff out of the bag related to the lesson. You know, we're talking about a lost sheep. Well, could we bring some sheep's wool in and pass sheep's wool around and have a feel and a touch of sheep's wool and smell what it smells like and feel like being a shepherd? Okay, so touch, feel, and movement. And obviously the games play a very big role in terms of movement because they're learning the concepts through play. Consult a professional. Sorry, let me just go back there. I wanted to just say on this, I don't think I did include that. Simple adaptations. Okay, so a child with special needs may lack the ability to engage in a particular activity. Could you simply adapt it so that they can engage in the activity? I apologize, I've just lost my way here a little bit. Am I on point 3 in your outline notes? I'm sorry about this. Let me just quickly go back. Can I just say a little bit more about each of these? Visually, I want to say to you simple adaptations like this. If your curriculum provides too few pictures to tell a story, then you need to find some more pictures. Okay, and they can be very simple pictures. They don't have to be complicated pictures. So freebibleimages.org is my go-to site. Freebibleimages.org is my go-to site for pictures. It's got a broad range of pictures from photographs that have been really well done all the way down to toddler drawings. Okay, sometimes the drawings are a little bit desperate, but anyway, you can choose what you want. And the idea is you need to have a picture for every single scene in the story. That's the idea. So they need to be simple pictures, but you need to have pictures. In terms of the auditory adaptation of the lesson, could you vary the voice in some way in terms of your tone? Could you have two voices as part of the lesson? Could you use puppets, which may use different voices? Could you do a simple sketch or a drama, something like that, to ensure that you're appealing to their auditory sense? Now, we found that this even works with adults. So it's coming up for Easter again, and normally on Good Friday we have a sort of all-age service, And normally it's an extensive text that gets read. It's extensive. You know, a couple of chapters, the whole Passion narrative almost. And what we do is we just say, just impromptu right there and then, although we've prompted some people who've got the main speaking parts, we basically do a dramatized Bible reading. And so the whole congregation becomes the crowd shouting, "Crucify him." You've got Pilate, you've got Jesus, you've got Peter, whatever the different characters are, and basically we read, and it's amazing how everybody is so engaged. I mean, you'd never normally sit through a couple of chapters read like that in a church service, but they do. So it's even helpful for the adults. So could you use different voices? So it's not just your monotonous voice, but you're involving, especially I suppose if you've got a helper, which you ought to have, if they can participate as well in terms of voices. So auditory. In terms of kinesthetic, so you want appropriate crafts to help them. Three-dimensional figures that represent the story are quite helpful because the children can then move them around. Particularly helpful for boys. Boys generally like to manipulate their environment. So, you know, if you've got a little model that they can retell the story by moving them around, that's a very helpful thing for them to do. Could the children perhaps dress up in costumes and reenact the story in some sort of drama? Very simple additions need to be made to get children actively involved in the storytelling process. You don't have to have all the clothes. A crown is good enough for a king. You know, you might need a stick, you might need whatever else. Just simple props that illustrate what you're trying to do, and you could do a sort of drama, a mini drama, kinesthetic learners. Other simple activities simple adaptations that you may need to make. You know, you might need to provide additional assistance. So for instance, if the child's assembling a particular craft and they may just struggle with the fine motor detail, could you just provide a bit of extra assistance and then they can actually do that craft? It enables them to do it. Does the child maybe need to be pushed around? So if I'm playing a game and a child's wheelchair bound, I'll need someone to push the wheelchair for that child. We can still run across the class. We can still participate in the game in that way. Why wouldn't we do that? As I mentioned earlier, if there's a little seed, there was one game that we play where it's the parable of the sower, where we've got cups that are unmarked, but they're actually marked underneath of the birds, the sun, the 30, 60, 100. And what the kids have got to do is they've got to run and deposit their seeds into one of those cups. And each team's got a different kind of seed. There's red beans and white beans, and they deposit those in those cups. And then what I do at the end is I'd say, okay, you deposited 15 beans in this cup, but this cup was one of the seeds that fell on the path. There's a picture of a bird here. It means you get no points for this bean. Okay. And this one was one that got scorched by the sun. You get no points for this one. And this one that became 30-fold, so you get 30 points for every bean deposited in this cup. Now, we played this game with this non-verbal girl in a wheelchair. And all we did was, because she's struggling with in terms of her motor skills, she could hold a bowl. She could hold a bowl, and a leader could pop a seed in, and we could race her across the room in the wheelchair, and we could take the seed out, and she would point with her eyes which one she wants it to go in, and she could put it in. We put it in for her. So there she's struggling with fine motor skills, she's struggling with gross motor skills, but we've overcome that for her, and she's participating in the game. Sometimes it's going to mean that that team doesn't win. That's okay. I think that's good for children to learn. I think it's good for children to learn that we're including someone, and it may be a disadvantage to our team, but actually we're all learning through the process, and that's okay. Children need to be brought on board with this and help to understand that we don't all have equal abilities, and sometimes in the church we've got to accommodate each other, even if that means self-sacrifice, which I think is exactly what it means and what we need to be taught. Okay, so simple adaptation. Sometimes a substitute. Maybe there's a particular craft that you're doing with children where a single substitute, an easy substitute might be fine, which enables that children to still participate, even though they're not doing exactly the same thing. It might mean that you pre-cut stuff for them, so you'll know what they're able to do, what they're not able to do, and so they can still participate with your help. Fourthly, let's consult professionals, please. There's plenty of them around. You've got to have someone in your church who's in some way, shape or form deals with either kids with special educational needs. They may be an occupational or a speech therapist. They may not be part of your children's ministry team, but they might be more than happy to give you a hand. They might be able to review the materials that you're using. They may be able to offer some helpful suggestions. You might be able to pop them an email and saying, I'm not sure how to include this child with this particular thing that we're trying to do. Could you have some ideas? I'm sure they'd be more than happy to help you with that. Fifthly, the classroom size. And I'm talking about the actual classroom size, the physical classroom size. You know, you want to be clever in terms of how you use the resources that have been given to you. If you've got a child in a wheelchair, you are going to need a bigger classroom. We're meeting in a school currently. Well, not currently, but you know what I mean. And it may mean that more of the desks need to be moved out the way to accommodate a wheelchair. That's all it is. It's the only accommodation we make is that we pack up all of the tables and chairs every single week, and we pack them back down again when we're done. That's okay. It's an accommodation. So the classroom size, the ratio of the teachers to children becomes important. But I think my personal opinion is if you've got someone who's got profound needs, then I think it's better to have someone who can one-to-one with them. Far better to have someone who can one-to-one with them. Now, you may not have that luxury. You may be able to buddy them up with someone. So you might have a more mature child in your class who could buddy up with the child who's having struggles. That's a good thing to do. When I was at Cub Scouts, you have Cubs, Brownies, what do they call them here? What do they call them? I forget what they call them. In Scotland, they call them brigade, boys' brigades. When I was in Cubs, we had a blind guy come, yeah, Gary. Gary used to come, he was blind. And he used to participate. And every single week when Gary came, someone was given the job of being Gary's buddy. And we loved it. We loved it. It was our job to be Gary's buddy. And we helped Gary with what he needed help with. There's nothing, that's a very good thing to do. It's a very good thing to teach children to do. To be other person-centered and to be providing that help. So is it possible in your class that you could buddy people up in terms of helping? Obviously, the smaller teacher-to-child ratio is helpful. I think it's just helpful generally. I'm very happy with a 5-to-1 ratio in my Sunday school. Very happy with those size classes. It means that we can build profound relationships and we can have good teaching. Everybody gets a chance to participate. As you think about your lesson, you can make specific application. Very happy with those smaller ratios anyway. The nature of the class, you need to think about that. So some classes you get that are totally off the wall, don't you? It's got mostly 8 to 10-year-old boys in. They can't sit still for 2 seconds. But you know, children with sort of neurological disorders struggle with any hint of chaos. So when there's a chaos in the environment, it's a real problem for them. And so you need a classroom that is more orderly and quiet. It may well be that the child needs to use ear defenders. Some children do that. There was a kid at Keswick year before last, who walked around. He had his own set of ear defenders, and he'd obviously he was of the age where he had learned that actually if he's not coping well, he just pops them on, and he's created his own quiet space, and that's fine. That's no problem. I mean, my mother struggles with loud noise. When she goes to the cinema, she stuffs tissues in her ears. Okay, that's her coping mechanism. So ear defenders might be an option. Sometimes when there's too many things going on, it produces a sensory overload. That's true for all children, actually. If your content is too frenetic and there's a sensory overload, it may interfere with their ability to learn or to remain engaged. So we've got to try and sometimes control the noise levels and the activity levels in order to accommodate those children. Sometimes creating a nice quiet zone for them that is their special space is quite helpful. You get these pop-up tents. I don't know if you've seen these things. They sort of pop up, they sort of zip. I don't know what they're for. They're like showers. I think they're like external, or they're outdoor showers, like canvas pop-up tent things. Have you seen those? Or they use them, now I'm
I would just call it a pop-up tent.
Call it a pop-up tent. Yeah, it's like, I think they use them in sort of tanning, like a tanning spray booth kind of thing. I wouldn't know. I don't have that problem. I go in the sun and I change immediately, but you know, not red. So yeah, those little things are quite helpful. So a little desk and a chair can fit in there, and we can have activities that they like and things that they like doing. One little girl at Word Live one year, we had colouring in pages for her. She liked Play-Doh a lot, so we left Play-Doh there, and we tried to engage her with the program as much as possible. When the leader noticed she was getting feeling a bit, fidgety or not enjoying the program too much, she would then retreat to her safe space, and that was a space where she could do what she wants to do. Now, obviously, we're trying to engage them in the program. If she's going to be playing Play-Doh, then I want to try and say, well, can we make something related to the lesson? Can I try and hear what's going on in the hall and try and relay it to her in a quieter, more, in a way that will better help her? You're trying to do that. Now, obviously, that's human resources again. It requires one person going aside with one child in order to maximize that time for them. I think that's worth doing. I really do think it's worth doing. And if you know who's going to be in those groups, or if you know on the morning you watch the kids come in, you see this kid come in, you say one of the person from my SEN team could join that class and help that child for the day. And if you've got your cheat sheet, then all you do is you pull out the cheat sheet, let the person have a look at it, say, yeah, okay, I know what's good for today for this particular child. Sometimes it's timing that needs to be adjusted. So we need to adjust the timing that we've allotted for a particular activity or a task. Very often too much time is allocated to an activity. Have you ever had that problem? Yeah, you sort of think to yourself, oh, it'll take about half an hour to do this, and then 5 minutes has gone by and actually they're all done, and you don't know how you're going to kill time. And that's a problem, because it creates boredom, it creates disinterest, and that's a much higher likelihood of them wandering around or engaging in undesirable or less desirable behavior. So when a child finishes an activity too soon, they may become disengaged, they may initiate self-play, and it's never really helpful. So for that kind of child, we need to provide structure. We need to provide a range of activities. We don't want a frenetic pace in terms of our activities, but we want alternatives. So, when my boys, it's just talking on a sort of lower level, when the boys in my class have finished, younger boys have finished their craft work, which literally takes them 10 seconds. Have you noticed that with young boys? Here's a craft activity. All they need is a black, blue, or green crayon. They scribble across the entire page and they say, I'm done. Okay. Now, I've got no problem with them saying, yeah, okay, it's fine, I'm done. Is that all you get? That's fine. I've got no problem with them saying, okay, well, let's go and play a game. I've got no problem with some of the children in my group carrying on doing craft activity and colouring in all the colours of the rainbow while someone starts to play a game next door. And as you're done, you can join the game. I've got no problem doing that. So not everybody has to do everything at the same time. Are there alternatives that you can provide for this child who has disengaged from activity and needs to do something else? Most of our sections in our Sunday school need to be short, they need to be sharp, but they must not feel rushed. Okay, so we're not, just because you prepared something doesn't mean you need to do it. Rather have too many things prepared than not enough prepared, and don't feel that you have to do everything that you've prepared. So we normally provide a range of games. I've normally got a second game up my sleeve just in case the first one doesn't go as planned. Okay, I don't force myself to do it. At the end of the lesson, maybe if the preacher's still going on longer than he should have gone on, maybe I'll pull the game out then and do it then, but there's always something up my sleeve. 8th point there, simple language. Can we please get back to very, very simple language for everything, for our lessons and our instructions that we give? And when we give to children, give instructions to children, particularly sort of children who've got the kinds of issues we've been speaking about today, but I think just generally for all children, give instructions one at a time. So you're not giving them a list of instructions, you're giving them instructions one at a time. To demonstrate what you mean they need to do with that instruction is a helpful thing to do. So boys and girls, we're going to take this bean from here and we're going to run across the room and we're going to put the bean in the cup like that. Okay? Everybody understand? So I'm giving instruction one at a time, I'm demonstrating what to do, and I'm checking for their understanding. Does anybody not understand? what I mean when I say take a bean from here and put it in a cup. Be aware of rhetorical questions. Most children with SEN will struggle with rhetorical questions. They'll feel compelled to answer every question you ask. So rhetorical questions just don't work. And if you're going to ask something that sounds like a question, you should expect an answer, because that's exactly what you're going to get. Okay. I want to avoid lots of writing. I don't want them doing too much writing. I'd rather have them connecting blocks, or have them filling in blank spaces, or some of the activity sheets have just got a whole bunch of questions, because I just like to have a chat. That you don't need to write anything down. This is not school. Let's just have a chat and use those questions as a conversation starter. These children will generally struggle with application questions. They find it almost impossible to put themselves into a hypothetical situation. So when you're having application questions, you've got to think very clearly about that. You've got to try to connect it with an experience that they have had, because they won't enjoy thinking through hypothetical situations. They just cannot put themselves in someone else's shoes for the most part. So that'll be very hard for them to do. Okay, those are some ideas. I'm going to stop at that point. And we want to spend some time in breakout rooms, but before we do that, perhaps we could deal with some questions. Are there any particular questions from all of that?
Does anybody want to wave? Sue Olive, go for it. Hang on, yes, there you go.
There's some great suggestions over here in the chat. I don't know if you're all picking that up. Becky George on YouTube with Makaton Tutor.
Yeah.
Right, here you go.
I'm going to steal that idea.
Yeah.
Becky George,
Yeah.
I'll make a note of that. Yeah.
Okay, Sue, do you want to speak?
Yeah, Rory, you gave us two very good charts.
Okay.
Which is it possible for those to be sent to us
Yes.
at some stage?
The one chart, did you mean the example table?
The one
All about
was,
me.
I think we talked about, I think the people have found the example table very helpful,
Okay.
and the example of the all about me sheet as well.
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's easily done.
What we'll do afterwards at some point when Wendy's back from holiday is we'll send an email to you all, and I've picked up some of the key points from the recommendations in the chat, and we'll put those and Rory's sheets in
Very good.
as a mailing to you all. Okay.
Fine.
Okay, thank you.
There is a question about how we manage safeguarding if the child goes to a safe space or a quiet zone during
Yeah.
our lessons.
So generally that zone's not going to be totally cut off. I'm not zipping them up in a tent alone with a leader. There's public access. People can see what's going on. It's just that, it might be a slight partition, so they're down. The leader might sit to the side in an open space. So they're at hand and they can pass things to the child, but they're not actually sitting hidden away with the child. Obviously, we want to be, I say obviously, but I should never say obviously. I know I should never say obviously. Yes, absolutely. Please be aware of safeguarding issues. I don't want the child outside the room. It doesn't want to be, it's got to be in a space that allows a child to feel safe, but it mustn't be out of sight, because out of sight is out of mind. So just be aware of that. What someone says they've used those in the past. What is that? A beach shelter.
Beach shelter.
Fantastic. You see, it's the sense of feeling, it's a sense of closeness, especially, so for instance, Word Alive, we've got a massive hall that we all meet in. It's all very loud and stuff. So it's the feeling of, I mean, we feel like that as well, isn't it? It's the feeling of shelter and closeness. So beach shelter is a really good option to do for that. Yeah, good. And then
make your own little teepee.
Yeah.
You can make your own teepee and a sheet or something around it, but just rather than have it completely closed, you open it up to those.
Yes, and I mean the obvious candidates in terms of toys and stuff like that are, it's tactile type stuff, it's Play-Doh, it's crayons, it's coloring in pages, it's all those things will be helpful. I had a boy once at Word Alive. I got assigned to him. I had him for the entire week. It was really, really hard work. And we just found that making things out of boxes was helpful. So we spent our days making things out of boxes. It was quite extraordinary. But he was listening. He was taking in what was coming off the stage. We would have an opportunity to chat about that. But we made a race car and all kinds of stuff out of boxes. It was a fascinating year. I still see him every year, and he still comes to say hello. So it must have been a successful time together.
Rory, one thing I wanted to add when you said about having other activities, so if someone's finished quickly and someone else is taking their time, that's really good. But the thing to watch out for is if you've got someone that's regularly needing extra time, and the moment they're done, it's like the game's finished because you don't filler. But then it means they always miss out on that game. So making sure they always have a bit. Just to give an analogy, it's a bit like someone rushing ahead on a walk. Someone else eventually catches up. The other one stopped and waited for them. They catch up and they're like, great, let's carry on. When the one who was doing great has had a break, and the one that was struggling.
I think, and those things need to be assessed, you know. So I used the analogy with boys, but actually I've got one boy in our Sunday school who loves his craft work. He's not a very sporty kind of boy. He doesn't actually like the running around in the games. He prefers to sit and do his craft activity, and he obsesses over it to the point where actually he doesn't want to leave until he's finished. I've got to sort of say to him, you can take it home and finish it at home. You know, and of course, one time I had to send him home with a particular color crayon because he doesn't have that particular color crayon at home, and he needs to finish this, and the parents are waiting and all that sort of stuff. So I think all those sorts of things, it's on an individual basis. And once again, you know, if we're building relationships with these children, we will know what they need and we provide them with what they need, and we're being flexible. So there are general principles here, sure, but we need to be flexible. What is your ultimate goal? Your ultimate goal is that your child has a good experience of warmth and engagement from the people of God, that they are concerned about them, that they're concerned that they clearly understand who Jesus is and clearly understand the lesson. That is what we're trying to do. And everything else becomes secondary to that goal. So even in our Bible Tots thing we run every week, we want it to be warm, we want it to be welcoming. I'm wanting them to grow up with a very positive experience of God's word and God's people, and that we are there to help them. We are not there to judge them. We are there to help them in any way possible. And we will do anything. Paul says, I have become all things to all men so that some might be saved. And I don't think there's any extent that we shouldn't go to help these children. Especially because I think, and I could get shot down for this, especially because I think that largely, not always, but largely the education system is not helping them. There's just too many children to cope with. It's not because of lack of will on the part of the teachers. It's not because the government hates these children. It's just because it's just so big. It's just so big. And I think that we as a church, especially because we've got smaller numbers, I think we can do a much better job, and we ought to be doing a better job.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Okay. No?
Yeah, me again,
Go,
sorry.
Sue.
You told us about a couple of websites. Could you just repeat the wording?
Okay, so it's Free Bible Images. I actually type it up here quickly. Free, actually, I should send it to everybody. Let's do that.
I wrote it in the chat earlier.
Yeah.
Is it in the chat?
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, Sarah, why don't you just include that in the thing? So
Yeah, that will go.
freebibleimages.org.
Yeah, that will go in the.
Now, freebibleimages.org actually have a little story planner that you can download in any language you like, actually. And although their story planners are not bad, sometimes they're not really good at digesting big words. But for the most part, I actually sometimes just use their story planner, because all I'm looking to do is tell the story. I'm not teaching the story, I'm telling the story. I think storytelling and story teaching are two different things. You tell the story and then you explain what it means. That's the teaching part. So we're not just about telling stories, we're about teaching stories. So you have a look at their story planners. It tells you which picture to show and what to say, more or less. And you can adapt it. You don't have to do it word for word. So have a go at those. Quite helpful.
And the other one was Story Stack or something like that?
Yeah, Story Stack. I didn't mention that today.
It's in the chat.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
It's in the chat. They're like plastic
Yes,
cups,
I know what they
like
are.
disposable coffee cup size.
I normally promote them in my storytelling training
There you
session that
go.
I do. Story Stack, yeah, Story Stack are just cups. And once again, it's great because you can tell the story quickly. You can use the cups, and you can tell the children, okay, right, can you tell the story back to me now? And that's another way to draw children who have got bored and who are now up and wandering around, particularly children who may have SEN, they're up and wandering around. It might be the way you can draw them back into the group is by giving them something specific to do in that group. So that's one way to draw them back in. So you've got to recognize that with some of these kids, they're going to withdraw from the group, and you've got to try and draw them. You've got to try and coax them back into the group. Particularly with this Aspie boy that we've got. His mother gave me a book. It said all cats have Asperger's, I think was the title of the book, which was fascinating because it was showing the parallel to how a cat behaves and how people with Aspie behave. So, you know, if you walk into a room with a cat, you can't just go up and give the cat a big hug. He won't want to know you, really. He will come to you on his terms when he's ready. And it was just a fun way of seeing, you know, if you understand that, when as long as you're in the room and you're available, at some point the child will come up to you and engage with you. You just got to give him some space and let him settle down. And that's how he functions, and that's perfectly okay. It's acceptable. Okay. So yeah. All right. Anybody else?
Can I just say, mention Count Everybody In.
Yes.
They have lots of resources for SEN.
Yes, good one. Sarah, you're making note of that. Count everyone in. Very good. Very good.
And they also have a Makaton trainer as well.
Okay.
Who'll actually come to your church and train.
Very good. Or on Zoom.
Or on Zoom these days, yes, quite.
Okay. Very good. Well, if there's nothing else, I just want to say that the whole purpose, I mean, as I say, I don't have a doctorate or degree in any of this sort of stuff. I'm just having a go. And all I'm really wanting to say to us is, you know, I think we can do more. I don't want us to feel overburdened and overwhelmed by this. I think it's just basically trying to challenge us to think, you know, what could we change? What could we change that would, you know, it'll be a small thing that makes a world of a difference to a child who's not really fitting in anywhere else in our crazy world. And if there's one place that they ought to fit in, it's got to be the local church. It's got to be that. And it may not require a lot of effort on our part, just to make those small accommodations. Even the word accommodation is not great, is it? Just to make those small changes that allow them to engage in the most helpful way. That is what we're trying to do. And as I say, I think if you can try and find someone in your church whose heart beats for this, you'll find someone this is their lifeblood. You say, could we gather a team? Could you help some of us just train a small team up so we could become a little bit more specialist and we could drop in and help people? And then we all learn together, but you've got the specialists who come in to do the work that needs to be done. I think it's a very good way forward. Okay.